I took this job because I was running. That's the honest version. The version I told myself at the time was cleaner. I needed money. The pay was good. The location was remote. All of that was true. But the deeper truth was that I needed to disappear. And the North Atlantic is about as disappeared as a man can get without dying. 120 miles of open ocean between me and the coast. No paper trail, no last name on the crew manifest that matched anything tied to Marcus Anthony Shepard. I went by Mark Cole on the Ethelred. I'd been Mark Cole for 8 months. The flight out was 2 hours. I spent most of it watching the sea. It went from green to gray about 40 minutes out and then stayed gray. That flat, dead gray the North Atlantic does in October. The kind that makes you feel like you're looking at the world after it's given up. The other passengers were crew rotations. 6 men, 2 women, nobody talking. Everyone had the same settled look, like they'd made a decision a long time ago and stopped questioning it. The rig appeared 15 minutes before we landed. A smear of industrial gray growing slowly into something with angles and height and mass. I'd worked offshore rigs before and knew the scale, but this one sat differently on the water. The platforms I'd worked were busy things, flares burning, cranes moving, constant industrial noise. The Ethelred was still, too still. No flare at the stack. The derrick was present, but not turning. We circled once before landing, and I watched the deck. There were people, but they moved slowly and didn't gather in groups, and no one looked up at the helicopter coming in. One of the crew rotations, a broad man with a red beard who hadn't spoken the entire flight, stood when the rotors wound down and looked at me across the aisle. "First time?" "First time here, not first time offshore." He nodded like that distinction didn't matter as much as I thought. "Follow the rules," he said. "That's the whole job." Not advice. Something memorized. Captain Jonas Voss met me on the helideck. Late 50s, Norwegian, built like a former boxer gone soft. Gray beard, permanent squint. Oilskin jacket in weather that didn't require one, weight slightly favoring his right leg. He didn't offer a hand. "You're the new diver." "Mark Cole." "I know. Follow me." He walked me through the rig for almost an hour. Methodical, crew quarters, mess hall, control room, equipment bays, the dive station below the main platform. Short sentences. "This is your bunk. This is where you eat. This is the saturation chamber. This is the bell." No elaboration, no questions about my background. What I thought of the place was that it was wrong in a way I couldn't name. Not dirty, well-maintained actually, but the atmosphere sat differently. In saturation diving, you develop a sensitivity to pressure that never fully goes away. Your body learns to read it. On the Ethelred, something was registering just below the threshold of any formal reading, present from the moment I stepped off the helicopter. At my cabin door, Voss handed me a laminated binder, about 30 pages. "Read it tonight. Memorize it. These aren't suggestions. What happens if I don't follow them?" "You go in the water," he said. "Not as a diver." Flat, probable outcome. Then he walked off without looking back. I sat on the bunk and read the binder twice. 8 rules, laminated, a few annotated by previous hands in ink I didn't recognize. I got out my pen and started adding my own notes in the margins. The mess hall was half full for dinner. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Veteran crew were easy to identify by their stillness. The newer hands ate faster and kept their eyes moving. "You get used to it," said a voice across from me. Cropped blonde hair, lean, faint old scars on both forearms, pale with age. "Sana Ekdahl, lead diver." "Mark Cole." She already knew. "Saturation experience?" 12 years Navy, 3 more commercial. About 400 hours below 200 meters. "This is different from Navy diving," she said. "Not information. Something settled. Down there, you're never alone. Even when your instruments say you are. Especially then." I waited for her to explain. She didn't. "Briefing at 0700. Coffee finished, she left. I sat with my stew getting cold. I was a technical diver, instruments and procedure. I was going to have to adjust my thinking here. I was on deck at 2340 because I couldn't sleep. Rule 1 was sitting in my head. At 2347, the rig goes silent for exactly 11 minutes. I wanted to see what it actually looked like. The deck was cold. I stood at the railing and watched the water. Black. Properly black. Not the deep blue black of a moonlit ocean, but a flat absence that started at the waterline and went down without limit. The rig's running lights caught the surface close in. 10 feet out, the ocean stopped existing visually. At 2347, the generators wound down. Not slowly, all at once. The vibration I'd felt in my boots since stepping off the helicopter disappeared. Without it, the silence was enormous. I'd been in deep silence before. This was different. Not the silence of insulation, the silence of everything deciding to hold its breath. The wind had dropped. The sea stopped slapping the hull. Even the cold felt quieter. I stopped moving. My hands tightened on the railing. The water below was blacker than it had been 60 seconds ago. I know how that sounds. I'm being precise anyway. The quality of the dark had changed. It had depth and texture and the specific quality of being watched by something that doesn't need light to see. I held my breath without deciding to. The pressure came first, not in my ears, behind them, in the bone behind the ear, the way depth pressure feels when your equalization isn't keeping up. I hadn't been underwater. I was standing on deck, at sea level. The pressure had no business being there, and yet there it was, building slowly. I gripped the railing. At 23:58, the generators came back on. The vibration returned to my boots. The water below went back to being just dark water. I exhaled. First real breath in several minutes. I looked at my hands. The skin across both palms had torn, shallow but bleeding. 11 minutes without noticing. My hands had the evidence. I went inside, washed them, lay down with the lights on. Something was down there. I'd known it from the binder, the way you know things intellectually before the body catches up. Now I knew it the other way. In my palms, in the pressure behind my ears. I opened the binder to Rule 1 and wrote, "The first night, I stood on the helideck and held my breath. The water below was black, blacker than any water I've seen. I felt something down there. Not saw. Felt. Like pressure building behind my eyes." At 23:58, the generators kicked back on. I exhaled for the first time in 11 minutes, left the lights on, didn't sleep until well after 2. The 0700 briefing was in the dive station. Voss covered the week's schedule. 2 routine descent inspections, equipment maintenance, nothing deep, nothing near the lower markers. What are the lower markers? Below 200 meters, not part of your schedule this week. What's down there? Equipment. The kind of answer that closes questions. Santa caught my eye across the table and gave a small shake of her head. After the briefing, she walked me through the dive gear. Good equipment, better than commercial standard, some better than Navy issue. The unusual thing was the bell interior. The floor and lower walls had iron filings embedded in a resin substrate, heavier than any coating I'd seen. "Rule 4, Sana said before I could ask. "The dive bell must be scrubbed with iron filings after every descent." "What does it actually do?" She looked at the bell the way you look at something that has saved your life. "It keeps things out. That's enough." We checked the filings together. Dry. Apparently the correct condition in a humid equipment bay. Someone had been very deliberate about the weight of iron in that coating. "The silence protocol last night," I said. I felt something. Pressure behind my ears. "Normal the first night. For most people it fades." "Does it fade for you?" She looked at me directly. "No, but you get better at carrying it." My first dive was that afternoon. 160 meters, routine sensor inspection. Sana and I, standard 2-man descent. Down here, I knew what I was doing. I'd been a lot of things in the 2 years since the Navy. Some I wasn't proud of, but in the water I was still the thing they'd trained me to be. I ran my checks with the calm of 15 years in environments that killed people regularly, felt the familiar settling as the bell descended, the pressure rising evenly, the surface world receding until there was nothing but the hiss of the gas mix and the creak of the cable and the work. The rig structure disappeared above us around 50 meters. After that, nothing in any direction but the black. At 140 meters, the temperature dropped. Fast. Not a gradual thermocline shift, but a directed change, cold cutting through the suit in a way that felt specific. The instruments and my body registered it at the same moment. 3 degrees in about 15 seconds. Short of Rule 3's threshold, but close enough that I was doing the math. Sana watched the gauge. "Steady," she said. I held still. The reading plateaued and then slowly normalized, the cold retreating. I breathed through the helium oxy and kept movement minimal. Then, below us, 60 or 70 meters further down, I saw the light. Green. Pulsing slowly, rhythm neither biological nor mechanical. Too bright for bioluminescence, too steady for refracted surface light. It came from below and slightly south, and it was beautiful in the way that wrong things in deep water sometimes are, completely, specifically wrong, and pulling at something below the level of decision. I looked at it for about 3 seconds. Then I looked away. Rule 8 was exact. I turned from the viewport, fixed my eyes on the instrument panel, and counted. Sana said nothing. I could hear her breathing through the mix, steady, professional. When I reached 300, I looked up. "You saw it," she said. "Green light, below, south-southwest." She reported it to the control room in a flat tone. Voss's voice came back. "Noted. Ascend on schedule." We ascended on schedule. I sat in the equipment bay while Sana ran post-dive checks and noticed my hands were shaking. Pressed them flat against my thighs and breathed. 15 years, 400 hours below 200 meters. Not a man who shook after a standard descent. But something at the edge of that sighting had registered in a way that wasn't fully visual, the rhythm of the pulse. It took several minutes sitting on that bench before I could identify what it reminded me of. Something breathing. Large, patient, awake. Sana sat across from me when the checks were done. She looked at my hands, then my face. "You looked away," she said. "Yes." "Good." A pause. "Some don't." There was weight in how she said it. I didn't ask the follow-up. Neither of us was ready for it yet. I went back to my cabin, opened the binder to Rule 8 and wrote, "Sana told me her father saw a light. Green, like bioluminescence, but wrong. Too bright, too steady. He swam toward it." I stopped there. I didn't have the rest of the sentence yet. I put the binder down and lay back and looked at the ceiling. The rig hummed around me. Generators, vibration, everything measurable. But underneath all of that, the other pressure. The one behind my ears that hadn't stopped since I stepped off the helicopter. Something was down there. It had been down there a long time. And it had looked at me through 60 meters of black water, and I had looked away, and that was the correct and professional thing to do. But lying on my back at the end of that first day, I was quietly certain I'd be looking at it again, that whatever lived below this rig would make sure of that. I held my breath when the generators cut at 23:47 and counted the 11 minutes by heartbeat, and when the vibration came back, I exhaled slowly and lay in the resumed hum of the rig and thought about what I'd run here to escape. The brothers hunting me felt very far away, very small. Whatever was down there was neither of those things, and unlike the brothers, it already knew I was here. I was almost certain of that by the end of the first day. By the end of the first week, I'd be sure. The second week started the same way the first ended. with the pressure behind my ears and the generators humming and the sense that something below the rig was keeping track of how many days I'd been here. I stopped going to the deck for the silence protocol. I stayed in my bunk instead, flat on my back, held my breath, counted 11 minutes by heartbeat. It was easier that way, not less frightening. Easier in the sense that I'd found a procedure for it, and procedures were something I understood. In the Navy, you dealt with dangerous environments by converting them into checklists. The silence protocol at 2347 was on my checklist now. It didn't make the pressure go away. It made it survivable. That was the thing I learned in weeks 2 and 3, the difference between survivable and safe. The Ethelred was survivable. It was not safe and had never been safe, and the crew who'd been here longest had arrived at that distinction and made their peace with it. I watched them the way you watch experienced people in any unfamiliar environment, looking for what they do that the newer hands don't. What the veterans did was simple. They didn't waste anything. Not words, not movement, not attention. They ate without conversation. They worked without commentary. When they looked at something, they looked at it completely and then stopped. No idle staring out portholes, no lingering on deck after a shift. They did what the moment required and went somewhere else. It looked like discipline from the outside. I came to understand it was conservation. Men who had decided to burn as little energy as possible in a place where something below could feel them burning it. I started doing the same without meaning to. By the end of week 2, I was eating faster, talking less, moving through corridors with the deliberate economy I hadn't used since saturation diving. The rig was reshaping me. I didn't object. The dives in weeks 2 and 3 were routine. Sensor checks, equipment maintenance, nothing below 180 meters. Sana ran them with the same professional quiet she brought to everything. She started explaining things I hadn't asked about yet, small operational details you could only learn from someone who'd survived long enough to understand the environment. She told me which hull sections sounded hollow because the iron there had been replaced during repairs and wasn't fully integrated yet. The thing below could feel the difference, apparently. She told me the mess hall had 4 layers of iron in the walls, more than anywhere else on the platform. I started sitting with my back to the wall in the mess. The veterans already did. We didn't talk much about anything outside the work. She didn't ask why I was there, and I didn't volunteer it. What we had was the diving, the equipment, the readings. The way the water below a certain depth showed sonar return patterns that didn't match any geological formation on record. "What do the patterns look like?" I asked her once, in the bell on the way down. She thought about it. "Like breathing," she said. "Slow, regular." She didn't add anything else. Father Mateo found me in the mess at the end of week 3. I'd seen him around the rig. Thin, black cassock under his oilskins, moving through corridors with the careful quiet of someone who had learned exactly how much space to take up. He carried a small brass censer on a chain. I'd assumed it was a religious habit until I noticed he only lit it in specific corridors at specific times, and the crew gave the smoke a wide berth without seeming to notice they were doing it. He set his tray across from mine and sat without asking. "You've seen the light," he said. Not a question. "You read the control room reports." "I monitor them, yes." No apology. "You followed Rule 8 correctly. Not everyone does." I put down my fork. "What is it?" "An eye. One of many. The thing below has no fixed form. You understand this from the rules. The lights are the shapes it uses for watching. It has been watching this rig for 50 years. It is very patient." He said it the way someone explains local weather patterns. Not dramatic, just established fact. I asked what it was, not what it looked like, what it was. He was quiet for a moment. "Old," he said. "In 1349, a priest in Norway witnessed it come out of the sea. It took an entire village in a single night. He survived in a stone chapel. When it returned to the deep at dawn, he understood it was not gone, only retreated. He convinced the church to seal the entrance. He told me about the monks, the diving bells, the 3 years of construction in freezing darkness. How they'd lined the chapel walls with iron because documents older than the church described iron as the one material the thing could not easily cross. How they had drowned willingly when the last stone was set, their souls intended as reinforcement. "It worked for 600 years, he said, and then someone built an oil rig above it. The consortium believed modern equipment could maintain containment more effectively than the ancient seal alone." A pause. They were not wrong, but they were also not right. The seal has been weakening since 1973. The rig slows the deterioration. It does not stop it. "The rules," I said. "Adaptations. Each rule corresponds to a behavior pattern documented by the monks." He touched the sensor. "Rule 1 comes from their observation that the thing surfaces at a predictable interval to listen for life above the seal. The monks enforced silence at that hour. The rig does the same with the generators. Rule 2, the names, comes from their understanding that the thing collects patterns. Names are distinctive. It learns them, keeps them. It calls them back," I said. Those tired eyes settled on me. "You have heard it already." I hadn't. That was still a week away, but I nodded as though I had. "The rules are not company policy," he said, standing. "They are prayers, adapted, translated into language the modern world can follow, but prayers nonetheless." He paused. "Follow them precisely. Approximation costs lives." He left me with my cooling food and the weight of 7 centuries of drowned monks, their souls still down there somewhere, reinforcing something that was slowly failing. Week 5. I was on deck running a cable inspection when I heard it. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. It came from below, not the hull at waterline, but deeper, conducted up through the support structure, resonating in the steel almost musically, clear, deliberate. 3 and 3, with a pause between that was exactly as long as a person might wait before knocking again. I knew what it was before I'd finished processing the sound. I'd read Rule 5 until I had it word for word. 2 newer crew members, a young Danish rigger and an English mechanic, had stopped working and were moving toward the ladder down to the lower deck. Not running, just drifting, the way you move toward an unidentified sound that might be someone who needs help. Voss came out of the control room hatch fast. He covered the distance in 3 steps and caught the mechanic's collar. "Control room," he said. "Now." We filled it. Me, Voss, the 2 newer men, 3 others who came up when Voss's voice went over the internal comm. 4 solid walls of iron plate. We stood and listened. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. It was clearer in here, conducted through the structure. And sitting in that room through the 2nd and 3rd repetition, I understood why the rule said almost human. It had the right rhythm, roughly the right force, but the spacing was slightly off. Not wrong enough to dismiss, just wrong enough that you noticed it after the first few cycles, the way you notice a recording of a voice instead of the real thing. It went on for 14 minutes. I counted. When it stopped, no one moved for another 2 minutes. Then Voss said, "Back to work," and we filed out. Sana found me on the heli deck an hour later. We stood at the railing and looked at the water. "Your father," I said. I'd been circling it for weeks. She kept her eyes on the sea. "He was a diver here, 2 years before the breach in the 90s. He went down and didn't come back." A pause. "The company said equipment failure, but you heard the recording." "I found it in the archive, 6 months before I applied for this job." Her voice was even, something long since processed. "He saw the light, the green light, and he swam toward it." She stopped. His voice was calm, peaceful, like whatever he was looking at was worth going toward. "I've listened 100 times. There's no fear in it, not even at the end." "Is that why you came here?" She was quiet long enough I thought she might not answer. "I came to understand what he saw," she said. "What could make a man want to go towards something that was going to kill him?" She turned and looked at me. "I think I understand it better now." I thought about the green light on my first dive, the 3 seconds I'd spent looking at it before I managed to look away. I wrote later in the binder, next to Rule 6. I asked Sana if she'd ever lost a partner. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, 3. I reported all of them. That's my job. I didn't ask follow-ups. The dream came in week 7. I'd been sleeping badly for 2 weeks by then. Not nightmares, just a low-level restlessness. A sense of something pressing at the edges of sleep the way the thing below pressed at the seal. I'd wake at odd hours with the pressure behind my ears sharp and immediate and lie still until it faded. The dream wasn't like normal dreaming. Normal dreaming has a logic problem. Settings shift. Narratives dissolve. This was the opposite, completely, oppressively consistent. I was underwater, breathing it easy and full, surrounded by stone walls that had been there for 7 centuries. The chapel was small, stained glass windows that had no business being intact at that depth, and behind them a light, not the green from the deep, but amber, the color of very old candlelight through old glass. Voices chanting in Latin, slow, steady, and then a voice that wasn't Latin, a voice that said my name. Marcus Anthony Shepard. My mother, dead 12 years. Her exact voice, the particular weight she put on all 3 parts of my name when something was serious. I came awake gasping. The clock read 23:47. The generators had just cut. The silence protocol was active. I lay completely still in the dark and felt the pressure in my ears, sharper than it had ever been, and listened to my own heartbeat and nothing else for 11 minutes. The generators came back at 23:58. I let my breath out slowly. I opened the binder, found Rule 7 by feel in the dark, and wrote, I dreamed of the chapel in week 7, stone walls, water pressing against stained glass, a voice chanting my full name. I woke up gasping. I didn't request transfer. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see it. Maybe I already knew I wasn't leaving. I also turned back to Rule 2 and wrote, 3rd week, I heard my mother. She's been dead 12 years. She called my full name, Marcus Anthony Shepard, from somewhere beneath the rig. I stood at the railing and listened. I didn't answer, but I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. I lay in the dark afterward and thought about the voice. It had come from inside my dreaming, not from the water. But the binder said the dream meant it had found me in sleep, and that it would find me in waking soon after. I believed that. I believed all of it now in a way I hadn't in week 1 when the rules had still been strange. I told Sana at breakfast. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she put her coffee down and looked at me. 48 hours to request surface duty, she said. I know. It gives you more time, not safety. Time. I thought about the 2 years of running. The aliases, the cash jobs, the rented rooms, waking in unfamiliar places and checking exits before I'd fully opened my eyes. I thought about the brothers on land, still looking. I thought about how small all of that felt compared to what was 300 meters below where we were sitting. Running had always been temporary. I'd been waiting, without knowing it, for something that was worse to run from than whatever was behind me. I'm not requesting transfer, I said. Sana nodded, not surprised. I didn't think you would. She picked up her coffee and didn't push it, and we finished breakfast in the quiet we'd been building since week 1. That evening, I stood at the port railing and looked down into the water. The light was going, the last of October pulling color out of the sea, and the water below was darkening through gray toward black. I looked down, and after a moment, I felt, not heard, not saw, felt, something below looking back. Not the background pressure, something more direct. Eye contact across a very large distance. I didn't look away this time. I stood there until the dark was complete. Then I went inside. Whatever was down there knew I'd seen the light and looked away. Knew I'd heard the dream and stayed. Knew I wasn't leaving. I wasn't running. For the first time in 2 years, I was standing still. I didn't know yet what that was going to cost me, but I was going to find out. Week 8 started wrong. I noticed it the morning after I stood at the railing and felt the thing looking back. The rig had a rhythm by then. I'd been on the Ethelred long enough that I could feel when it was off, the same way you can feel a change in a ship's engine before any instrument registers it. The weight of the air had changed. Not the smell, not the temperature, just the weight. Like the pressure differential I'd felt since my first day had quietly increased a notch. The crew felt it too. The veterans were more watchful than usual, which said something. Conversations that were already short got shorter. I watched Halverson, the Finnish diver, who'd been here longer than anyone except Voss, run his hands along the iron bolts in his bunk room doorframe before going to sleep, testing each one. He caught me watching and didn't look embarrassed, just nodded and went inside. Voss was spending hours in the control room, not reviewing logs or talking on the radio, but standing in the middle of the room watching the instrument panels. All of them. The way you watch something you don't trust to stay stable. I asked Sana what the readings showed. Pressure variance below 200 meters, she said. Building for 3 days. How much variance? She looked at me. Enough. Father Matteo had started burning the censer in the corridors continuously. Twice daily, same route. The smoke sitting in the passageways long after he'd passed. He'd told me back in week 3 that it blurred the rig's heat signatures, disrupted the thing's ability to press toward warmth. He was burning a lot of it now, which meant the signal needed a lot of blurring. Larson went missing on the 3rd day of week 8. 26, Danish, 2nd rotation. Solid diver, right habits. Back to the wall, voice down. Silence protocol without reminders. One of the crew I'd mentally marked as someone who would last. He and his dive partner Bjorn went down for a routine sensor check at 140 meters. I was in the equipment bay doing bell maintenance when the docking sequence ran, and Bjorn climbed out of the hatch and sat down on the floor immediately, like his legs had simply stopped, still in his suit, face the color of old concrete. He didn't speak for several minutes. When he did, his voice was flat in the way that happens when someone has run out of the capacity for inflection. The temperature dropped, he said. I looked down. He was reaching for something green. He stopped. Then he was gone. I looked at the bell. The iron filings on the floor were dry. Whatever had taken Larson had taken him in open water before he could reach the bell, fast. That thought, whether Larson had seen the light and chosen not to look away, sat with me through the rest of the day and didn't let go. Voss called me and Sana to his office that afternoon. He stood rather than sat, hands in his jacket pockets. The seal is leaking. Pressure readings confirm it. What took Larson was a fragment, a projection, through a crack in the lower section. He looked at both of us. We need to know the damage. The chapel, Sana said. You'll descend to 300 meters. Visual inspection of the chapel exterior. The door, the stonework, the outer iron lining. You report every breach you can identify. He paused. You don't enter. You don't approach the door. You inspect and come back up. Sana said yes immediately. 300 meters was deep saturation work. Trimix blend, near total darkness, pressure that would kill anything not built for it, next to a structure actively leaking. The last man down in that area today hadn't come back. All right, I said. Voss held his measuring look for one more second, then nodded. Tomorrow morning, full pre-dive protocol. Matteo adjusts the sensor route to cover the equipment bay. He said the last part like operational detail, Not like the thing that told you exactly how serious the situation was. We went down the next morning. Pre-dive took 2 hours. Every component checked twice, iron filings verified dry, tri-mix blend calibrated for 300 meters, comms tested and retested. Sana ran through it with complete attention, and I matched her step for step, and the 2 hours of procedure were the calmest I felt all day. Then we were in the bell, and the bell was descending, and the water closed over the viewport, the North Atlantic stages on the way down. First 50 meters, light fades from gray to deep blue, 50 to 100, deep blue to something almost purple. Below 100, black, and all you have is the bell's exterior lights, a cone of visibility 6 meters in any direction, and beyond that, nothing. At 160, the instruments started fluctuating, not failing, inconsistent. The sonar return from below showed the breathing pattern Sana had described weeks ago, slow and regular, but stronger, closer. At 220, the chapel appeared below us. It resolved slowly as we descended, old stone encrusted with centuries of growth, barnacles and cold water coral built up until the surface was more biology than masonry. But under the growth, the shape was unmistakably worked stone, cut, fitted, deliberate, low and heavy, built the way you build something when you're not coming back to fix it. The walls were thick, the iron bolts in the stone had gone dark with age, but were still seated. The stained glass windows were intact. 600 years of deep water and they were still there, and behind them, the green-white light pulsed slow and steady. The same light from my first dive, the same light Sana's father had followed. I kept my eyes on the stonework. "Door," Sana said on comms. The chapel door was on the south face. Iron-banded wood that should not still have been wood after 6 centuries underwater, but was. It was not fully closed, open about 4 inches, and from the gap the light leaked through. Sana keyed to Voss. "Visual on the chapel. Door open approximately 10 centimeters. Green light visible." Voss came back flat and immediate. "Confirmed. Don't approach. Begin exterior inspection from current position." We spent 40 minutes working systematically around the structure from the bell. East and north faces intact, iron bolts still seated. The west face had a crack running from the roof line down about 2 meters. Not a collapse, a separation in the mortar. The kind that happens when something presses outward from inside for several centuries. I noted it, Sana noted it, we moved on. Then she said, "South face," and we looked, and the door was open wider. Not 4 inches, closer to 8. While we'd been inspecting the other walls, something inside had pushed it further. I was already watching the temperature sensor when it dropped. 5 degrees, 8 seconds. "Up," Sana said. Same tone as my first dive, just the word. I was already moving, pulling us back from the viewport, hands on the ascent controls. The bell started rising. The chapel receded below us, and in the gap of the open door the green light pulsed. And then something appeared in the gap that wasn't light, the opposite. A section of the doorway that absorbed what little illumination there was and gave nothing back. A region where the water behaved differently, where the bell's exterior lamps simply stopped, absorbed, not reflected. It came through the door slowly, the way something large moves when it isn't used to being constrained by door frames. Not all of it, something that felt like a piece of a much larger thing still pressing against the seal inside. It had no fixed shape. Within the dark region, things moved and resolved briefly and dissolved. Something long and articulated, something that curved the wrong direction, something that suggested a jaw too large to be reasonable. And eyes. Dozens of them, opening and closing without pattern, each one catching the lamplight and throwing it back as a green-tinged reflection. Every reflection showed the same thing, the inside of the bell. Sana. Me. I pulled my eyes from the viewport, kept my hands on the ascent controls, counted the rate. The temperature dropped another 3 degrees. The pressure in my ears spiked. Not from depth change, from proximity. Then it spoke. Not through the water, through the comms, through the equipment, through whatever it used that had no name I knew. Marcus Anthony Shepard. My real name. The name I hadn't spoken on this rig, hadn't written anywhere, hadn't used in 8 months. Said in a voice that wasn't anyone I recognized. Not my mother, not anyone. Something that had been collecting the sound of names in the dark for 700 years and had learned how to assemble them. I kept my hands on the controls. Rule 2, don't respond. I didn't. Sana's hand was on my arm. I didn't know when she'd put it there, firm, through the suit. The most concrete thing in the world right then. The bell kept rising. At 180 meters, the temperature normalized. The comms went quiet. When I looked at the viewport again, there was nothing below us but regular dark. I exhaled. We docked 12 minutes later. I climbed out and sat on the equipment bay floor with my back against the iron wall. My hands were shaking, both of them this time, not just one. Worse than after the first dive. Voss was in the bay. He watched me from across the room. No expression. After a while, the shaking slowed and I pressed my hands flat against my thighs. It said my name, I said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. The look of a man who knew exactly what I meant, because it had happened to him too. They always do, he said. Then he walked out. Sana came to the decompression chamber an hour later during mandatory pressure reduction. She sat across from me in the small space and didn't say anything for a while. I kept running through the observable data. A fragment had breached the chapel door and come into open water. It had used the comms to say my name, and then it had watched us rise and made no move to follow. That last part was the thing I kept returning to. It had let us go, not because it couldn't have stopped us. I didn't think the iron seals on the bell would have held indefinitely at that range. It had let us go because it wanted us to come back. It had my name now, spoken aloud in its presence. It knew what I was and where I would be. Sana was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully name, something between pity and something else. The something else was what I recognized from how she'd talked about her father. He sounded happy, I said. On the recording. She nodded. It said my name, I said. And for a second, just a second, I wanted to answer. She didn't look surprised. I know, she said. We sat in the decompression chamber and said nothing else, and the pressure equalized around us slowly, and 300 meters below, the chapel door was open, and something very old was waiting to see what we would do next. The council met the morning after Sana and I came out of decompression. Voss had called it for 7 o'clock in the control room. Me, Sana, Father Matteo, Halverson, and 2 senior crew I knew by face, but not well. 7 people in a room built for instruments, standing because there weren't enough chairs. The panels behind Voss showed the same readings they'd been showing for 3 days. Pressure variance below 200 meters, climbing slow and steady like a temperature that wasn't breaking. Voss stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at all of us once before speaking. The door cannot be closed from outside, he said. The iron banding on the frame is cracked. The mechanism is broken from the inside, something pressing against it for a long time, and the frame finally gave. Without the door seated, the seal degrades. We have 4 days, maybe 5. What happens at 5 days? I asked. It comes through, Voss said. Not a fragment, the thing itself. Matteo had his sensor in his hands, unlit, turning it slowly. The original solution is the only solution. A willing soul, placed inside the chapel and remaining there freely, reinforces the barrier more effectively than stone or iron. The seal was always partly structural and partly inhabited. The monks who drowned here in 1350 did not just build it, they became it. He paused. A soul given willingly is stronger than any stone. Father Ron documented this himself, and everything since has confirmed it. The rules exist because of that knowledge. So does this rig. Outside, the North Atlantic pressed against the hull the way it always had, indifferent and cold and completely uninterested in our problem. "Someone has to go in," Voss said. "Reach the altar, place their hands on the stone, stay willingly. That is the requirement." He looked around the room. It held for 600 years. Halverson looked at the floor. The senior crew looked at the instrument panels. Santa looked at me. I thought about the brothers on land who had been looking for me for 2 years. I thought about the name. Marcus Anthony Shepard. The one the thing below had spoken through the comms like it had always known it. I thought about Danny, my dead partner. The salvage job that went wrong, the company's offer, the document I had signed to keep the blame from spreading further. Danny's brothers had found out anyway. I'd been moving every 6 months since, never long enough to put anything down, carrying the weight of what I had and hadn't done. I had told myself it was penance. After a while, it had just been weight. "I'll go," I said. Sana closed her eyes, just for a second. Voss looked at me. The measuring look had been there since my first day, always calculating which category a person fell into. Whatever he found, he nodded. "Prep starts at noon. You go down at 1400. I had 4 hours. I spent the first in the equipment bay running through the bell alone. Pre-dive checks, even for a dive with no post-dive plan. 15 years of habit doesn't stop because the context has changed. The filings were dry, every component within spec. I calibrated the trimix for 300 meters and sat on the bench afterward with my hands on my knees, listening to the rig hum. Sana came in around 0900 and sat across from me without speaking for a while. "I could go instead," she said. "No. My father went down here. It might make more sense." "No." Same word, same tone, second time. "You know this rig better than anyone below Voss. They need you here for the long work, and I've been running for 2 years. There's nothing left on the surface I'm not running from. Down there it at least means something." I paused. It's always meant something. I just didn't know what until now. She didn't argue. She was too honest for arguments that weren't going to hold. I went to my cabin and got the notepad from the shelf beside the binder. I sat on my bunk and wrote a letter to my mother. She'd been dead 12 years. I wrote it anyway because there were things I'd never said to her, and there was a version of Danny's death I had never told anyone, honestly. Not the version I'd signed off on with the company, not the version Danny's brothers had decided was true, the real version. What happened on the job, what the company offered me, what I chose, and what that choice had actually been about. I wrote all of it down. I folded it and brought it back to Sana in the equipment bay. "After," I said. Her eyes were wet. The most I'd seen from her in 8 weeks, and she didn't hide it. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." The steadiness in my voice was real, which surprised me a little. "I've been running my whole life. It's time to stop." She nodded once, the way she nodded when something was settled. Then she helped me finish prep and we talked only about the equipment, and that was exactly right. Voss walked me to the bay at 1350 and stood while I suited up. He was quiet through most of it. When I was nearly ready, he said, "The altar is at the back of the chapel. Stone table, iron cross mounted on the wall above it. You'll see it. Matteo briefed me," I said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I went down in 83. Smaller breach. Instrument failure on a containment dive. I exited the bell before the iron seal was verified. Something was there. It spoke my name." He reached down and touched his left leg without seeming to notice he was doing it. The limp that had been there on my first day and that he had never explained. "I answered it. Then I tried to run from it for 2 years. You can't run from something that knows your name. It stays with you wherever you go. He looked at me. Going down willingly is different. The monks understood that. Their seal lasted 6 centuries because they chose it. He paused. Just get to the altar. Hands on the stone. Hold on. Operational instructions. No sentiment. Just the job. One last time. I climbed into the bell. The last thing I saw before the hatch closed was Sana's face. The folded letter was visible in her jacket pocket. She wasn't crying now. She was watching me the way she watched everything, completely, without waste. That was worth holding for a second, so I held it. Then the hatch sealed, and there was only the bell and the cable and the water building against the hull as the winch began. The water closed over the viewport, gray to deep blue, blue to near purple, purple to black. Instruments tracking depth, the numbers incremental and steady. Pressure rising in my ears, equalization, the routine mechanics of a descent I'd run hundreds of times in 2 different careers. Except the post-dive plan was blank, and the bell would go back up without me. At 160 meters, the sonar breathing started. Stronger than on the assessment dive 2 days ago, slower. The rhythm of something that had been waiting a long time and could feel the wait ending. The chapel appeared at 312 meters. The door was open close to 40 centimeters now, the green-white light spilling through the gap and catching the sediment around the entrance. I docked the bell against the exterior wall, engaged the iron locking bolts, and opened the hatch. The cold came first. Rule 3's cold. The cold the thing generated. I wasn't surfacing. I pushed through the hatch into open water and moved toward the door. The water inside the chapel was warm. It changed the moment I crossed the threshold. The external cold cut off and was replaced by a warmth that had no business at this depth, the kind that accumulates in stone walls over centuries and stays. The pressure in my ears shifted and became the watching pressure I'd cataloged since my first night on the Ethelred, amplified until it was almost physical. The chanting was there, not through equipment, just present in the water, the Latin syllables moving through the deep at their slower-than-air speed, the stone walls vibrating with them. The monks who had drowned here in 1350 were still chanting. Their voices had become part of the structure, the way the iron bolts were part of the structure. I moved through the corridor, stone altars to either side, old and crusted with centuries of growth. On the floor, through the settled sediment, the shapes of bones. The monks, in place where they had drowned, arranged without panic. The way you arrange yourself when the arrangement is the point. I understood that better than I would have 8 weeks ago. The sanctuary opened at the end, larger, higher ceiling. The stained glass window pulsed its green-white light, slower now, the intervals between each pulse stretched. The altar was a stone table, waist-high with an iron cross on the wall above it, the iron dark with age but solid. In front of the altar, the thing waited, more deliberate than the fragment I'd seen 2 days ago. Roughly the shape of a person standing, put together without a full understanding of how proportion worked. Too tall, wrong in the ratios, dark in the way that creates a hole in the world rather than an object in it. 2 eyes open, reflective, catching the green light and throwing it back. It spoke. My mother's voice. Danny's voice, which I hadn't heard in 2 years and still recognized immediately. And a third voice I had never heard but knew. Sana's father, the recording she had memorized 100 times, calm and peaceful at the end. All 3 layered on top of each other. Marcus Anthony Shepard. You came. We knew you would. I didn't answer. I walked toward the altar. The thing shifted sideways, making room, not blocking. The way something large moves when it has decided to allow passage. I felt the cold of its proximity as I passed. The reading I'd been watching on instrument dials translated into direct sensation, and then I was past it and my hands came down on the stone. The altar was warm, more than the water. 7 centuries of pressure from below and the contact of the monks before me had worked into the stone and stayed. My hands felt the residual weight of all of it, ancient and specific, going in both directions at once. The thing pressed against me from behind. The watching pressure came in hard, trying to find grip, trying to pull me back from the stone. It used the voices again, briefly. I wasn't listening anymore. I held. The stone warmed further. The chanting shifted. Something older running under the Latin. A single, sustained note felt in the chest more than heard. The kind that moves through bone rather than air. The green light in the window dimmed, degree by degree. My connection to the surface faded gradually, the way a radio signal goes with depth. The surface was still there. Sana with the letter in her pocket. Voss watching the instruments. Matteo walking the sensor route through the corridors. At 23:47 tonight, the generators would cut and the rig would go silent for 11 minutes, and the thing in the deep would surface to listen and find nothing to reach for because I would be here, holding. The signal went to static. The static faded. There was only the chapel and the stone and the thing pressing at the edges of everything, and the long, patient work of holding against it. Through the stone, through the water, through the long, dark distance, I could feel the bell rising without me. Carrying Sana's face pressed against the viewport, watching the place where I had been until there was only dark. I took this job because I was running. Now I'm not running anymore. I'm 300 meters down, in a stone chapel built by monks who drowned before my great-grandparents were born. The thing is out there, pressing against the seal. It knows my name. It always will. But for now, it holds, and I hold with it. That's the job. That's always been the job.